Dean Martin found out about his son's death live on stage. What happened next was beyond heartbreaking. Before the music, before the lights, before the legend, there was a man, a father, and on one cold night in 1987, the world watched that man shatter, though nobody watching could have guessed just how completely. It started like any other performance. The showroom was alive, buzzing with anticipation. Fans packed in, shoulder to shoulder, the air electric with expectation. They weren't just waiting for a concert, they were waiting for Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man whose voice had defined a generation, whose charm had graced screens and stages for decades. The band tuned their instruments. The curtains slowly rose. And then, as if summoned by the spotlight itself, Dean stepped forward, dressed in black, flawless as ever, poised, confident, timeless. He was the very picture of the entertainer the world thought it knew. But what happened next would haunt the entertainment world for decades to come. No one in that crowd had any idea. They didn't know that in the moment Dean Martin froze mid-stage, history itself was bending. March 21st, 1987. 5,000 fans roared as Dean Martin launched into Everybody Loves Somebody, a song he could have sung with his eyes closed, a song that had carried him to stardom. And then, halfway through a verse, he stopped. His eyes drifted toward the side of the stage. His expressions shifted. The color drained from his face. And then, without a word, without a warning, Dean Martin dropped the microphone and walked away. A ripple of confused laughter spread through the audience. Surely it was a joke. Another one of Dean's classic, effortless, playful moments. But backstage, the air was thick with something darker. Something had broken. And for Dean Martin, life as he knew it would never be the same. In that instant, he learned a truth no one could ever prepare for. His son, Dean Paul Martin, was gone. In the next 48 hours, the world would witness a side of Dean Martin no one had ever seen. A father completely undone. A man whose life had been quietly held together by the laughter, the light, and the love of his son for decades. To understand why that night destroyed him, you have to understand who Dean Paul Martin truly was. Dean wasn't just the child of a Hollywood legend. He was his pride, his joy, his anchor. Born on November 17, 1951. Dino, as his father affectionately called him, grew up in the bright shadow of one of Hollywood's biggest stars. Yet, he did not crumble beneath it. He rose, a teenage tennis prodigy, a pop rock sensation with Dino, Daisy, and Billy, a charismatic actor, and perhaps most impressively, a captain in the California Air National Guard, entrusted with flying F-4 Phantom jets. Dean Paul Martin was everything a father could hope for. Talented, fearless, grounded, and beloved by everyone who knew him. But on that night in 1987, all of that brilliance and the heart of his father vanished in an instant. Dean Martin was the very definition of cool. Calm, untouchable, a man who could glide through life with a joke on his lips and a smile that seemed to hide everything beneath. To the world, he was effortless. To his fans, he was untouchable. But when it came to Dino, that legendary armor cracked. Everyone who knew the Martin family understood the truth. Dean Paul wasn't just another son. He was the one who held a place in Dean Martin's heart that no one else could touch. It wasn't favoritism. It was something deeper, a connection so intimate, so unshakable, that it went beyond father and son. They weren't just family. They were best friends. And that's why what happened that night didn't just disrupt a show. It broke Dean Martin in a way the world would never see coming. The audience that night didn't know it. Nobody could have known. They were about to witness the moment Dean Martin's world fell apart. It all started quietly in early 1987. Dean was 69 years old. Still a legend. Still the king of cool. But time, relentless and invisible, was catching up with him. His Las Vegas and Atlantic City shows still drew thousands. Yet something had changed. His health was slipping. A lifetime of heavy smoking had left its mark, and the voice that once flowed like liquid velvet had begun to rasp at the edges. Still, when Dean stepped onto a stage, it didn't matter. That charisma, that glow, it was still there, effortless, electric, and the audience felt it. March 21st, 1987, Bally's Casino, Las Vegas. A Saturday night show, 5,000 fans pressed shoulder to shoulder, eager to see a legend perform one more time. Dean arrived early, around 7 p.m. His longtime road manager, Eddie Marsh, immediately sensed something different. Not bad, different. Normally, Eddie would later recall, Dean kept to himself before a show. Quiet, distant. But that night, he was joking with the crew, asking about their kids, laughing like the old Dean. He seemed lighter. What Eddie didn't know, what nobody backstage could have guessed, was that Dean had started his day with a gift, rare and unexpected. A phone call from Dean Paul, his son, calling from March Air Force Base in California. It was brief, just a few minutes, but those minutes carried a weight Dean could never have imagined. "I love you, Dad," his son said. Simple words, ordinary words. Yet in the hours to come, they would become the most important words Dean Martin would ever hear. The audience would later insist there had been no warning that night, no hint of what was coming, but the real warning had already come, hours earlier, over that phone line. His son's voice, full of warmth, had said something else too. "I'm proud of you, Dad." Dean had replied naturally, equally proud, ordinary, routine, words they'd exchanged countless times before. Neither father nor son knew it would be the last time they ever spoke. At 9 p.m., Dean Martin stepped onto the stage, the roar of the crowd hitting him like a tidal wave. The spotlight caught his black tuxedo just right, making him look every bit the legend the world had never stopped believing in. The band struck up, and Dean slid into his opening number with that effortless charm only he could pull off. The audience erupted, whistles, cheers, claps, completely swept into the magic of the moment. Dean glided through hit after hit. "That's Amore," "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" Memories are made of this. For 90 minutes, it felt like time had reversed. Las Vegas itself had been transported back to an era when Dean Martin was untouchable, untamed, unforgettable. And then, at 9:35 p.m., he began his signature song, "Everybody Loves Somebody." The room quieted. Couples leaned closer, hands finding hands. Dean's raspy, unmistakable voice wrapped around them like a warm, familiar memory. And for a fleeting moment, nothing else existed. And then, something moved at stage left. Eddie Marsh, pale as paper, clutching a phone, his face drained of color. At first, he tried to signal Dean subtly. When that didn't work, he became frantic. Dean's eyes caught the motion mid-verse. He stopped. The music continued for a few disoriented seconds, then slowly faded into silence. The audience, thinking it was a dramatic pause, waited, captivated. Dean's gaze locked on Eddie. Later, friends would say you could see the life leave Dean in that instant, as if a switch had quietly turned off. "Something is wrong," Dean's voice said into the microphone. Not panic, not fear, just a hollow, chilling emptiness. "Excuse me, folks." He placed the microphone on the piano and walked off stage. The polite applause of the crowd filled the space, oblivious. Backstage, there was no show. There was only the beginning of the worst moment of Dean Martin's life. Eddie was already crying. When Dean reached him, he couldn't form words. He just extended the phone. On the line, a colonel from the California Air National Guard spoke. "Mr. Martin, I'm calling about your son, Captain Dean Paul Martin." Dean's hands trembled. "What happened?" "I'm very sorry, sir. His aircraft went down during a training exercise in the San Bernardino Mountains around 4 p.m. There were no survivors." The phone slipped from Dean's grasp. No scream, no sobs, just a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the room whole. Dean Martin, the man who had faced the spotlight, the cameras, the world, stood frozen, staring into a void that only he could see. Suddenly, his body seemed to betray him. Eddie rushed forward, but Dean brushed him away, moving stiff and cold, trapped in a moment of unimaginable grief. The stage manager sprinted toward him. "Dean, what's happening? Should we stop the show?" Dean turned, his voice barely recognizable, but carrying the weight of a father's deepest pain. "My son is dead." The announcement was immediate. Within seconds, the manager was on stage canceling the performance. Confused murmurs filled the showroom as the crowd slowly filtered out, still unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded behind the curtains. By morning, the headlines would tell the world. Back in the dressing room, Dean Martin sat motionless on the couch, tuxedo immaculate, hands resting in his lap. Eddie Marsh hovered helplessly. Dean wasn't crying. He wasn't speaking. He simply stared at his hands, as if trying to grasp how something so vital could vanish so quickly. After what felt like an eternity, Dean finally whispered, his voice broken, haunted. "He called me this morning, told me he loved me." Eddie wiped his eyes. "He did, Dean. He loved you more than anything." "He was flying," Dean murmured, eyes distant. He said flying made him feel free. Then, abruptly, he rose. "I need to go home. I need to tell Jean." Jean Martin, his ex-wife and Dean Paul's mother, had parted ways with him in 1973, but grief has a way of pulling people together. The car ride to Beverly Hills was silent, suffocating. Dean stared at the neon blur of Las Vegas, Eddie beside him, powerless. What could anyone say to a father who had just lost his child? When they arrived, Jean was already there, face swollen and streaked with tears. Dean stepped out of the car and collapsed into her arms. And in that moment, the facade shattered. Dean Martin, the cool, untouchable, legendary Dean Martin, surrendered to raw, devastating grief. He sobbed like a man broken in half, the pain of a father losing a son spilling into the night. Jean held him as they cried for the child they would never hold again. By the morning of March 22nd, 1987, the world knew Dean Paul Martin, son of entertainer Dean Martin, killed in a plane crash. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Everyone wanted to know how Dean was coping. He wasn't. He couldn't. He was sinking fast into a grief so heavy that even Dean Martin, the man who could charm, entertain, and mesmerize millions, found no escape. No one in the crowd understood why Dean Martin suddenly went silent, but the truth was already racing toward him long before anyone else heard it. Hours earlier, high above the San Bernardino Mountains, an F-4 Phantom had vanished into a wall of storm clouds. The pilot was Dean's son, Dean Paul Martin, a routine training mission, a plane built for speed and survival. But the sky that day was merciless. Thick clouds, brutal winds, almost zero visibility. And at exactly 4 p.m., the radar blip simply disappeared. Search teams combed the mountains for days. Helicopters swept the ridges. Boots pounded through snow and rock. But the terrain fought back. And with every hour that passed, Dean clung to a hope he already knew was slipping away. On the third day, rescuers found the wreckage, or what little remained. The Phantom had hit the mountainside at tremendous speed. There were no survivors. Dean Paul Martin and his weapons officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, were gone instantly. 6 days later, on March 26, 1987, the world saw something they had never seen before. Dean Martin, broken. The funeral at Los Angeles National Cemetery was full military honors, flags, uniforms, salutes, and a silence so heavy it felt like the sky itself was grieving. Celebrities sat beside pilots, fans beside family, and in the front row, behind dark sunglasses, Dean Martin barely held himself together. When the honor guard placed the folded American flag in his hands, his composure shattered. He pressed it to his chest and broke down. Silently, openly, nothing like the cool, unshakable Rat Pack legend people thought they knew. This was just a father trying to survive the unthinkable. Frank Sinatra stepped forward to deliver the eulogy. His voice wavered as he spoke about Dean Paul, his courage, his kindness, the brightness he carried everywhere he went. And then Frank looked straight at Dean, eyes wet, and said, "Dino, nothing I say can soften this, but your boy was loved, and so are you." Dean didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, holding the flag as if it were the last piece of his son left in the world. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just sat there, gripping the folded flag with trembling hands, staring at the casket as if he could will it to open. Everyone else left the cemetery, but Dean Martin stayed there, frozen in that chair, long after the service ended. And when he finally stood up, the world would never see him the same way again. In the days that followed, Dean vanished. He canceled every performance, stopped answering calls, stopped opening his front door. Friends who managed to get inside said it felt like stepping into the ruins of a life. Dean would sit alone in the dim living room, a drink in one hand, old footage of Dean Paul playing on repeat. It was as if time had stopped, and he wanted it that way. One of his closest friends, Shirley Malin, visited a few weeks later. When I walked into his house, it felt like walking into a tomb. Curtains closed, lights off, only the glow of a TV showing a young Dino swinging a tennis racket. Dean didn't even turn his head. He just whispered, "I don't know how to live in a world where my son doesn't exist." His daughter, Deanna, tried everything to reach him. Daily visits, warm meals, gentle conversations, but nothing worked. She said, "It was like my father's body was here, but his spirit left with Dino." Months slipped into years, and Dean's health eroded as fast as his hope. Decades of smoking caught up with him. He lost weight, lost energy, lost interest in the world that once adored him. The man who had defined effortless cool now moved like someone carrying a weight no one could see. In 1988, he made one last attempt to step back into the spotlight. A reunion tour with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. A dream lineup, but after only a few shows, Dean walked off the tour. "He can't do it, Frank," he admitted. "Every time I'm up there, I see Dino. I keep thinking he should be in the crowd. I can't pretend I'm okay." Sinatra didn't argue. He simply pulled his friend close and said quietly, "I love you, pal." Dean spent the rest of his years in quiet isolation. Old movies, soft music, fading memories, and the ache that never left him. And on Christmas morning, December 25th, 1995, the world lost Dean Martin. He passed away in his Beverly Hills home at 78, finally reunited, at least in spirit, with the son he never stopped mourning. The official cause of his death was listed as acute respiratory failure, but everyone who truly knew him whispered the real story. Dean Martin didn't die from illness, he died from grief. At his funeral, Deanna Martin stood at the podium, her voice trembling as she said, "My father never recovered from losing Dino. He tried, he really did, but the pain was too much. For 8 years, he carried that grief every single day. And now, finally, he's with his son again." Her words didn't sound like a eulogy. They sounded like the closing chapter of a love story between a father and the son he adored. Because the tragedy of Dean Martin and Dean Paul isn't a Hollywood story, it's a human one. It's proof that grief doesn't care who you are. Whether you're a world-famous entertainer or an ordinary man trying to hold your heart together, losing a child shatters you the same way. And so the legend of Dean Martin, the king of cool, remains forever intertwined with heartbreak. Behind the laughter, the champagne, the applause, there was a man who loved too deeply, who carried a grief too heavy for the spotlight to ever illuminate. His story reminds us that no amount of charm, no standing ovation, no fortune can shield a human heart from loss. Dean Martin perfected the art of appearing untouchable. Yet in the silence of that March night, we heard the truth. Even legends bleed, even icons break, and even the brightest stars can be dimmed by sorrow. His voice may still echo in recordings, but his pain teaches us something enduring. Life is fleeting. Love is precious. And the moments we wish to reclaim are often the ones we never will. In the end, Dean Martin didn't just leave a legacy of music, he left a testament to the fragile, profound humanity that lies beneath every legend. Dean Martin spent decades perfecting an image of effortlessness, the smooth voice, the easy smile, the man who made the world believe life was simple. But after March 21st, 1987, that image fell apart. There's a recording from that night, rare, almost hidden. You hear Dean, confident as ever, singing "Everybody Loves Somebody." Then silence. The band fades out. The audience murmurs, confused. And if you listen closely, painfully closely, you can hear the exact second his life changes. You can hear the moment the news reaches him, the moment the world stops being bright. That recording is haunting, not because of the sound, but because of the silence of a father realizing that no amount of fame, money, or success can shield you from the worst pain a human being can feel. Dean once said, "I'd give up everything I have to have my son back. All of it. The money, the fame, the career. I'd trade it all for one more day with Dino." But he never got that day. None of us get the days we beg for. And that, in the end, is the cruelest truth of all. Dean Martin didn't leave this world because his body failed. He left because his heart never healed.